Hello and welcome, everyone. We are live today on Authentic Connection Counseling Center Facebook page and Plum Creek Church's Facebook page. We are excited to bring a power-packed show today of three amazing clinicians at Authentic Connections Counseling Center to talk about how to cope mentally during COVID-19. Now, what you see on your screen right now is the schedule today. First up, we have Dawn, who's going to be talking about anxiety and depression. Then we have Dave at 3:20, who's going to be talking about couples and families. And Jill, who's going to be talking at 3:40 about teens and young adults. So if you're just joining us either live or in the replay, we would love to know you stopped by. So let us know by dropping a comment below that you're here. And remember, this is live today. If you have any questions or concerns or things you'd like to talk about with our amazing clinicians today, type them in the comments and we will talk about it on screen. So without further ado, Dawn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, what you do, and then explain to everybody why we're doing this today.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. My name is Dawn Gabriel, and I'm the owner of Authentic Connections Counseling Center. And the reason we're doing this today is because Plum Creek is actually my church, and they asked me and our counseling center to come online and do a live panel for the community of Creek or Castle Rock and just really talk through like what's going on with this pandemic and how are we feeling and what do we need to talk about, and just give the church community some opportunity to talk through mental health, which is so important right now.
It's a sensitive topic that's hard to talk about sometimes, but we do want to say you're talking to three very qualified clinicians that have answers to the things that might be going on in your life. That's what they do on a professional basis. And today with Dawn, the first thing that we are going to talk about is anxiety and depression. Dawn, this is a big deal. Not only has anxiety and depression kind of taken over, but a lot of us are really grieving some normal. And one of the first things we have to talk about today, because I know you want to show up for people, is grace, right? Talk about giving yourself grace without guilt.
Yeah, I think it's so important to just acknowledge that when we're going through a crisis in general, but especially the current crisis of the COVID-19, we weren't prepared for that. Just like any crisis, you're never prepared for it. You just are in it and you're responding in a crisis level. And so what that means is you're going to have a flood of emotions. And usually the average person isn't good at naming emotions. We usually know maybe 3 emotions, and that's usually sad, mad, angry. But we don't really get to talk about the emotions underneath all that. And so it's really important to just name the emotion, to kind of normalize it and to really understand what's going on. And so a lot of times, once you name it, you actually get more control over the emotion. And that's where you can give yourself some grace, because again, I don't know about you guys, but this is my first pandemic. And so we have, we don't have words for this. And so there's a lot of grieving going on. There's a lot of overwhelm. There's a lot of anger, confusion, the feeling of out of control. I mean, there's so much going on that we don't realize we're feeling all that. Usually we're just running to the store to get toilet paper or chicken, right? Like everyone just acted and they just started running to the store. And a lot of people, at least from what I've been hearing, didn't slow down enough to say, what am I really feeling? And what am I experiencing right now? And so that I just wanted to say, once you name it, once you normalize it, then you can give yourself grace and say, this is the first time I'm going through this. It's okay. It's okay for me as a professional even to be going through this. As the therapist at my center, we are all experiencing the same emotions you guys are. And so we are right here with you. Nobody's alone in this, all experiencing a ton of emotions. And yeah, we just think it's important. And that way, knowing that other people are going through it, it helps also give you some grace to say, this is normal.
Yeah, and this needs to be a time where, again, we do name it. So it's as simple as saying, walking down the stairs, maybe with a friend or a loved one, a wife, and saying, I don't know why, but I'm feeling really depressed today. And you're right, it gives you that power over it. And fully, it's understanding that these emotions are normal. We often hear the word anxiety and depression in the normal side of the world, not on our side in the counseling world, but it's like there are these words that you just don't say, right? If I say I have anxiety or if I say I have depression, I'm weak. And that's not really the case. This is something that every person in America at some point, I mean, the way I look at it is you're on a sliding scale at some point, right? Something bad happens in your life. There's a death or a loss. Okay, you're sliding more towards the depressed side. Then you right yourself. So to me, I give myself grace by really saying it's a sliding scale, right?
Yeah. That's a great point. We all at some point are going to experience a roller coaster of emotions. And I think all of us are going to experience anxiety and depression on some level. And I think another thing to mention, especially because we're working with a church population, is sometimes there's another layer of shame with spirituality of saying, if I was a good enough Christian, I wouldn't have anxiety, or maybe I didn't pray enough. And I feel like that is something to just address, that it doesn't matter your beliefs or even your relationship with God. Sometimes we are just going to have more anxiety and more depression, and that could be based on things in our past that have happened or current crisis. I don't think anyone has not been affected by COVID, and so on an anxious or depressed level. So it just, sometimes it's circumstantial, sometimes it's chemical. Either way, we don't want to over spiritualize it, and we just want to make it more normal for any community.
I totally agree. So we have a comment from Vince O'Brien. Vince is here, and thank you. I have no idea what the future holds. We don't. I lost my job at the end of April, not a furlough. And again, Vince, we feel your pain. There's a lot of people dealing with that too as well. I do pretty unique stuff, and likely all of us, family of 5, will have to move. The 2 youngest are in school next year, 1st grade and 5th. The 5th grader has ADHD and has been doing well here, but he'll be ripped out of that. I think I'm afraid, scared, angry, anxious, depressed over things. I think all 5 of us feel lots of stuff, and this is so hard. Vince, first, what we have to say to you is thank you for your authenticity. You said it. A lot of people are feeling it. So first, we want to thank you for being really authentic with that. And what do you have to say about that, Don?
Yeah, I think, again, like Danny was saying, thank you for being so honest about that. It's like the parents, the adults are feeling so intense right now, so many mix of emotions. And it's not just affecting you, it's affecting your spouse, it's affecting your kids. And then I think I read something that one of your kids has ADHD, so there's some special needs there, and it's hard. How do I manage all of this? How do I feel and deal and be with my family? And I think sometimes, again, going back to naming it with your family is going to be huge, and just saying, hey, we are all going through this, and it's okay for you guys to be scared. It's okay for mommy and daddy to sometimes be scared, but we're going to make it through. And there are times where maybe you need to reach out to a friend or even a counselor level and get some help and help. I know even my counselors we've really had to process through this and get help during this time to just process and unpack all these emotions because it does affect our whole family.
Clinicians or not, at the end of the day, you're human. These things hit you. You may be a little more educated on how to maybe get over it or hop over that hump, but at the end of the day, you're humans as well. So yeah, thank you for that, Vince. That was awesome. So let's talk about this thing that we're talking about a lot right now, which is grieving the normal. But before we do, I want to just welcome everybody, either live or in the replay. Today we are doing sort of a mental health and anxiety workshop on Plum Creek Church's page and Authentic Connections Counseling Center Facebook page. And here's what to expect. Right now, we're talking to Don Gabriel about anxiety and depression, but essentially, we're going to be moving through to talking to Dave Hollaback about couples and families, and finally, Jill at 3:40 about teens and young adults. So just want to show you a little bit about what to expect, and stick around. I know, we had a question, Vince, about your child. Maybe we can ask a question to Jill at the end of this. But talk about grieving the normal. What's that? What is that?
Yeah. So what I've noticed with my clients and even with friends and personally is there is a huge level of grief. And it's hard for us to even name grief as grief because It's really intense. And grief is one of those things and one of those emotions that have a million emotions underneath. And so a lot of times, sometimes people might feel more irritated or angry or frustrated, and they're showing that, and they don't realize beneath it, they're really, really sad. I know some people have had to not attend weddings or not get married when they wanted to, or not attend graduation is a huge one. We weren't able to do graduations live. Birthday parties, funerals, like there's a lot of grief of this is not the normal and we're not okay with it. I know for Plum Creek Church, it's been hard not being together as a community, and I'm sure all of the churches out there, or even big families, like it's hard not to be together. And I know we're coming out of that and we're trying to figure out what the new normal is, but there is still a level of grief of what used to work for me isn't working. Yeah. And my community isn't my community. It's different now. And so it's really hard to, we just need to name the grief, and it's okay. It's okay to name that and say, this is not normal. I miss the normal.
Yeah. And that's a completely normal thing. And that's the one thing all of us have in common is we are grieving what was our normal life. So COVID came, we got, stay-at-home orders. We're not going to work. People are losing their jobs, and we're not able to go out and look for jobs. The things that, Don, that you said worked for us forever. Like, okay, this has happened to me before. Now I know what to do. Well, the normal's out the window. Being with your friends, like I see pictures on Facebook of people who are so excited that they're eating indoors. They're eating in a restaurant. Like, who would have thought that we lived in a world where that was one of the most exciting things that happened to you, was that you're eating in a restaurant. And it's these little things that used to be so just normal for us that again, we're grieving. So a lot of this, and really the whole point of your talk, is anxiety and depression. So let's talk about really understanding the levels. So, anxiety and depression comes in different waves. There's different levels, and talk about, if it gets a little too much, what people should do.
Okay, sure. And so I have a little visual I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to see if I can get it here. So let me see. Can you get, there we go. So I have this cup, and this cup represents you as a person. And the water level is just how you would wake up on a normal day with everyday anxiety. In America, I would say we probably have, a third of the cup full of just everyday stresses. What raises this level is if you think about past or how you grew up and just experiences you had in your life, which we all do. Let's think of if someone in your family was sick, whether it's mentally ill or had cancer, that would add more water level. If you moved a lot growing up, another water level, or if your parents went through a divorce, more water level. So as you're seeing, the water level is high. So now let's talk about current day. So current day, we're going to use rocks as an example of what a current day stressor would be. So let's just think everyday stressor. You're running late. Yeah, you're running late to work and your car broke down. Look at the water level. Another one would be you got in trouble at work. Your boss said you didn't turn a thing in on time, and that's another water level. See how much level we have here. And then let's talk about COVID being a huge rock that goes in. As you can see, it just spilled over. And so what I wanted to say is that represents like a panic attack, or your coping skills are fried. You're not sleeping. It's more than usual anxiety. And however, some people, and then let's actually add in doing school online with your kids. And then maybe you got laid off with your job. So like things are obviously overflowing here. And so what a lot of people tend to do is focus on this last rock that just went in and say, well, as soon as school is over, I'll be able to cope better. But there's literally only like a fraction of an inch of space to deal with it. And then let's focus on if I find a different job and we're still working, or if COVID is over, we're still having this level. It's not the most space to deal with stuff. And so what I would say, if we're looking at this as a person, you can be used to coping at this level, but then when a huge rock comes in or a huge circumstance in life, it's going to be harder to deal. And so what we say is what a lot of times helps is therapy helps move the water level down. And so I'm just going to pour some out real quick. So if the water level's down even half, we are still going to be able to handle these rocks and it's not going to overflow. So to make that a little more practical is if you're experiencing panic attacks where you physically are feeling like I can't breathe, at times, or you feel like, am I having a heart attack? Or you're not sleeping as well, or you're noticing you're just really aggressive with your kids or your wife and you're snapping at your spouse, or irritable, or even with coworkers, like just that extra irritability. And we would say it's never too soon to get into therapy and get help. But especially if little parts of your life and you're seeing your anxiety or your depression overflow into other areas of your life.
Yeah, and it's okay to not be okay. You know, as she's talking about levels of anxiety and depression, it's okay to not be okay. And, you know, the one thing, you know, when you were filling up that cup, the one thing that popped into my head too is that sometimes people decide to use substances, right? Alcohol. Yeah. You're really not affecting the water level at all. You're using substances to cover it up or not think about it for a while. So I do want to put something out there. And I know, you know, what are your thoughts about increased use of alcohol and substances right now too?
Yeah, I think the stats were saying, I think 80% increase of use of alcohol. I would say more like 100% from what I've been hearing and seeing, and just talking with people. Alcohol has gone up. I mean, I think that was obvious when they tried to close alcohol and pot shops down. And the governor had to change it within an hour and say, just kidding, they're open still. People ran to that. And sure, in the moment, it might make you feel better. But then what it does is alcohol is a natural depressant. So it's harder to like the next morning get up and face things because you're depressed. And especially if you're dealing with depression, it's not going to really help that. And then also anxiety and depression, there's a very fine line in between the two. And so it's like a vicious cycle.
Totally. So you, as a practice, you do own Authentic Connections Counseling Center. You're offering 20% off to anybody if they use the code Plum Creek for their first 3 visits. So 20% off if you use the word Plum Creek to see any of the clinicians that we're talking to today, or any of the other clinicians in your practice, because you have how many clinicians in your practice?
There's 8 of us right now. Actually, 9. There's 9 of us. 9
total people. And we do want to encourage you, if it's getting overwhelming, now's a really good time to talk about it. So I think we're going to wrap up, and we are going to start to bring in Dave. Any kind of closing final thoughts?
No, I would just say I'm grateful for the time you guys are jumping on here. And I, once again, just want to say everyone is dealing with anxiety and depression on some level.
Totally. Yeah.
So you're not alone.
And if you decide to go get some help and you are in need of help, or you know a friend who is in need of help, share this video, let them know there's this special going on. And you do have sliding scales for people who are financially affected by COVID right time. So if they've lost a job or need some help, or just to get through life, you have a sliding scale for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But awesome. So thanks so much for your time today, Dawn.
Thanks, Danny.
All right. So I'm just going to show, I'm going to give you an idea of how the rest of the show is going to go. So we just met with Dawn talking about anxiety and depression from 3 to 3:20. Now coming on with me next is going to be Dave Hollaback, who's going to talk about couples and families. And then Jill Jackson at 3:40 is going to be talking about teens and young adults. And all of this is in crisis right now. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in Dave to talk a little bit about couples and families. Hey, Dave, welcome to the broadcast today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Danny. Yeah, my name is Dave Hollaback. I've worked at Authentic Connections Counseling Center since it started. So it's been 5 years now. But before that, and kind of coinciding with that, I do pastoral counseling, spiritual direction with people overseas. So yeah, I've been involved in this kind of work for the last about 9 years.
I love that. And today specifically, you're going to be talking about couples and families. So we know there's a lot happening within couples and families. We just talked with Dawn about grieving the normal. Nobody seems to have control over things now, but today you're here to add some value to people who are couples and families that are in crisis in general, because that's who you like to work with in your practice, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I love working with marriages and families specifically. So yeah, hopefully we'll add something of value.
Yeah. And again, I want to encourage you. This is a live broadcast today. If you have any questions or concerns, you can bring that up. We will talk about it with our clinicians today live on this show. So, Dave, talk about how to manage conflict when everyone's in the same crisis. So everyone is feeling this level of stress. We're all stuck in a house. Talk about how to manage this conflict when everybody's going through this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think the first step is recognizing that conflict's not actually a bad thing.
Love
That
it.
conflict actually can produce connection and kind of intimacy, whether that's in your marriage or your family. And so conflict in and of itself is not bad. It can become very bad, but we have to recognize that it's not kind of a moral issue. There's nothing wrong with conflict. Jesus experienced it. We all experience it. I think that's really important to recognize. I think the other thing is everyone's stress levels are higher. Everybody's anxiety is higher. So that means within your family, everybody's already at their peak limit, which means their behavior is going to be very individual and very different. And so one thing I want to say is that we need to make sure and not kind of judge the behaviors that are coming out within our families and our marriages, because they're going to be all over the place.
Right.
And what we need to do is kind of be able to see a little bit behind the behavior, see what's going on, be curious about that, to go ahead and then engage with what's going on. That's a tricky thing to do, but fairly necessary.
So people are likely going to be seeing emotions that they weren't used to in their spouse, or emotions they weren't used to in their children. And again, understanding that spouses and children, we're all going through this and we don't know what to do. And it could rear its ugly head in the form of conflict. So for people that are feeling the conflict, right? So I'm a parent. I have 3 young kids. We're trying to manage children in life, but ultimately at the end of the day, it creates some tension between my wife and I. Just because we're not used to our kids we're used to our kids going to school and having that break, and now they're here all the time, and now we're leading into summer, so parents aren't getting the break at all. But what I'm hearing is you need to give your loved one, your spouse, your kids, you need to give them grace at this time as well.
Yeah, we're just so quick to move to kind of a judgment place when we see behaviors, especially from our kids, when they're just erratic and kind of crazy. And we often aren't kind of slow enough to understand what's going on behind that, what's creating that. But the only way to be able to do that as parents is if we actually give our space to figure out those things in ourselves as well.
That totally makes sense. So leading into that, let's talk about, parenting your stressed children. So what's your professional thoughts around how to support your child during this time? They don't, depending on their age, they might not have an idea of what's going on. They just know it's different. They know they should be a little scared to go in public. They have to wear masks all of a sudden. How should we be best supporting our children during this time?
Yeah, and this is a bit of a cliche, but I think it's really important, that whole idea of when you get on an airplane, which no one's been on really recently, but you got to put the mask on yourself first, that oxygen mask, before you give it to your kids. And that's just, it really is important in this place, because if you're going to parent stressed out kids, you need to be in a place where your soul is somewhat calm and slow. And so if you don't take some time to kind of focus on yourself, you're going to be blowing up in the same way that your kids are. So that would be the first thing. I think another thing is, this is a great opportunity to apologize a lot to your kids, and quickly. And I think that's a really healthy thing, because you're letting them know, hey, we don't know exactly how to deal with this. We've got all kinds of different things going on in mom and dad, and we're not really sure how to do it. And so that's okay. And if there's behaviors, yelling, anger with your kids coming out, it's just an opportunity to apologize quickly and say, I'm just stressed just like you are. So I want to definitely encourage that kind of making yourself known to your kids in that way.
Yeah, I think giving yourself grace means you could have a shorter temper at this time. And I really hear you. So it means, snapping at your children, sending them to the room, being angry because you need a little bit of that time and you're just figuring, how do I get them away? There's a big difference between doing that. And there's a big difference between 10 minutes later going in and saying, hey, sorry. Sorry I snapped. Dad, mom, we're stressed. We don't really know what's going on. And I think that creates that bond with that child of, we're going through this together, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's okay to talk about it.
And that's the biggest thing is you want to communicate to your kids, Mom and Dad, we're going through this together. We're going to struggle. It's going to be hard. We as a family, it's going to be difficult, but we're going to do it together and we're all in the same boat together. But I also want to say just really quickly, I can't think of a time for parents where shame is more present than during this kind of crisis.
Yeah.
Because you have parents just like me who sent their kids to school for very good reasons because we don't want to homeschool them because we're not really gifted at that. And so you add extra stressors on. We start yelling at the kids more. Maybe we put on an extra 10 pounds during the COVID crisis. Right. So there's shame there. There's shame with yelling at your kids. And I just want to address that piece. We have to actually trust in Jesus in that place and trust what he did to kind of relieve that shame for us and live into that. Because if not, that shame will have you continue down that anger cycle, continue down that I'm not a good parent cycle. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're pushing away your kids, you're pushing away your spouse, because that's what shame does. It always pushes people away. So I want to encourage you to kind of meet with Jesus in that place, cling to the truth of what that means, and that in terms of what he did on the cross, and so that you don't kind of spiral downward.
And I think we should listen to you because I think you're dealing with 5 kids at home, right?
Yeah, we have 5.
You're not just saying advice. You live this.
Oh yeah, it's chaos at my house, and the shame attendant's always present.
Yeah, totally. And I like how you say that's normal. And what I learned from that is, it's okay to have these outbursts. It's okay that you're going through things, but be quick to apologize to your children. Be quick to own up to something that you're not proud of, and move on, especially during this time. And maybe ask your kids to give you grace, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm asking for that all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a little bit of advice about, parents and parenting your children, but ultimately there could be some struggles here in marriages. Gosh, how long has it been since you've been on a date night? For me, it's been quite some time. So even in us grieving our normal, being able to have time together, throw homeschool on top of that. What are you seeing? How can you really support these marriages during this time?
Right. Well, and yeah, you would expect, and I hope everyone expects, that this is going to be just a harder time in your marriage because you're both dealing with uncertainty, and no one likes that. You're both dealing with fear. Yeah. And no, fear, uncertainty, shame, those things are powerful kind of emotions, and they cause all kinds of crazy, erratic behavior. And that causes kind of tension in your marriage. So of course that's going to be there. And so I want to normalize that for one. But also I want to say, I think the things that I'm hearing are probably twofold. One being there often are different levels of risk that you might not be on the same page with your husband or your wife. Right. So maybe one of them feels very comfortable going out in public and is wanting to kind of press kind of the limits of who they're allowed to see and who they're not allowed to see. And then you have another spouse that's like, no, I'm going to listen to the governor as I should, and I'm going to follow all the rules. Everyone's going to wear a mask. We're going to disinfect everything. And when you're not on the same page on those levels of risk, it causes a lot of tension. And what I want to say about that is, your level of risk is not moral at all. It's just a different level of risk. And it's okay to be on different pages there, as long as you give each other grace in that. And so I would encourage marriages to have the conversation. What's kind of our theology of risk? What's our idea of what's okay and not okay for our kids? And that's a great conversation with your kids as well, because they're like, there's no risk here. I'm going to go out and I want to do whatever. But you want to talk about that as a family and how you can respect one another's kind of values about that, even if you disagree.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from the audience. What have you found in your own relationship that you've kind of found something that wasn't working, or given your spouse grace? I can say in my own life, what me and my wife struggle with is, my wife likes to have more control over things. She likes more of a schedule. I'm fine with that. However, everything's kind of out the window right now. There's no normal. And what I find me and my wife kind of stressing about is I'm trying to embrace this. Hey, we got no darn control at all anyway. So let it all go. No need to stress about it. And she's over here thinking, I need some control. Like I need some stuff that I know I'm going to do at certain times. And we're really rubbing because we're on different levels of giving each other grace, or giving her grace. She's holding herself to a lot of these same standards that are really not possible right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I mean, that's a great example, Danny. I mean, we all kind of, when we are all experiencing these different emotions, the way in which we engage those emotions is very different. Some of us move to, I'm going to be highly controlled and I'm going to try to manage every aspect of life that is in my control. And sometimes we do that a little bit too strong, and that causes tension. Others of us will avoid everything. We'll just pretend like it's not even there, and we'll go into a cocoon and we'll just shut ourselves into a room. And that's going to cause tension in your marriage. So we all have different ways of kind of dealing with it. And what I just want to say is that's where a conversation needs to happen. Like, what is going on in each of you? Sometimes we get into this habit of thinking, yeah, we need like a 3-hour date night to be able to communicate about these things. And that's just not realistic at this stage, especially if you have kids at home. So take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I would even suggest it's okay. Put them in front of a movie, have them do whatever, if that can help you to communicate about some of these differing values. And when that's out there, then you can actually deal with it. It's when we go to those silent places relationally that it becomes really kind of damaging in the long term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've got about 5 minutes left. And I have a question we didn't talk about, but I know you're going to be able to answer this. So as a couple, right? What's your advice to somebody who's noticing that their loved one is starting to kind of start dealing with some really serious depression, some really serious anxiety? I think most people don't understand how to breach that subject. What's your advice, or how do you have the conversation if you're recognizing that a loved one is not okay? And if you're recognizing a loved one does need some help, how do you even start that? Right. And what do you do?
Well, I think that's a great question. And you're right. Even though in our relationships, we want to say that we trust each other fully, these kind of conversations are kind of tricky and difficult. But the first thing I want to say is that we are blind to our own stuff, which is why we need the other person to say something. So if you do see your spouse in a place where you're thinking, oh, maybe they're too depressed, or they have all of this anxiety and it's really affecting things, it's okay for you as the other spouse to say, hey, you know what? I start from the idea that we're all kind of blind. We need each other. Here's what I see and here's what I observe. And just throw it out as that. Do you see that too? Do you feel that too? Do you experience that as well? And then you can move to, how are they feeling about it? What are they, and you can actually ask questions of curiosity.
Yeah.
Questions of curiosity are hard to be defensive about. Totally. And so if one of the spouses can just communicate their heart of curiosity and care, that sets the stage for, I think, a good conversation. And then, our premise, obviously, we're all therapists here, is we can't do this alone. So we need help. And sometimes, your spouse can help. Sometimes, they need another voice. And so that's where we would encourage, whether it's a therapist or a pastor or a spiritual director, life coach, whatever it is, we want to encourage them to kind of own what's going on in themselves and don't minimize it, and be able to share it.
Because there's a lot of help outside your family union. Again, that's why we're doing this broadcast today, is to kind of normalize what you're going through. All three of these clinicians that you're seeing today deal with people on a daily basis that are stepping up and saying, I'm not in control right now. My cup, if you got to see what Don showed off, my cup is overflowing, and I need to figure out how to get it back to a manageable level, because that's ultimately what crisis is creating, is sort of an unmanageable level where the littlest of things, like a car breaking down, can send you down a deep hole of depression or anger. And if you're recognizing that in yourself or in a loved one, then we've got good news, because the clinicians here at Plum Creek are going to continue to offer 20% off your first 3 visits for anybody that needs some support. If you're affected financially by COVID, then they have a sliding scale for you as well to make it more affordable, to help you during these times of stress, these times where we've heard it from all 3 clinicians today. These times, Dave, right, where we don't have a book on this. When you went through school, did they teach you how to even do your job in a pandemic?
Right. No.
It's really just, understanding that this is new for everybody. We're all figuring it out. You're not weak. If you feel like you're running up against a wall over and over and over again, that makes you human.
Right. I appreciate the word, Danny. It's a great word.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're going to go ahead and bring in Jill. So Dave, thanks again today for all of your value. If you're watching either live or in the replay and you want to ask questions to any of our clinicians today, feel free to type them in the comments. They'll respond back after. Or you can go to Authentic Connections Counseling Center, send them a message, visit the website. You can have a one-on-one private conversation if you're more comfortable with any of these clinicians. So Dave, thanks a lot today.
Thanks a lot, Danny.
So just to remind you of the flow today, we just spoke with Dawn about anxiety and depression. And then we spoke with Dave about couples and families in crisis. And we've got our third guest with us today, and we are going to be talking about teens and young adults and what's going on with them. So I want to welcome Jill Jackson with us today. Jill, welcome today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about what you do?
Sure. Like Danny said, I am Jill Jackson. I'm a therapist at Authentic Connections, and I focus primarily on teens and young adults. So hence why I'm speaking on that today.
Yes, and we know, we just talked with Dave, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stress going on. Parents who were like, we love school, are all of a sudden forced to be homeschool. There's a lot of stress, not just happening with us as adults, but happening in our teens and our young adults, where it may not show the same as it does for a teen or a young adult. So one of the first things we're going to talk about today is communicating while managing stress in your teens and young adults. So there may be more fights than ever right now. But talk about how to really communicate when these stress levels are high.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's important to remember is that this is a challenging time for everybody, but put yourself in the shoes of these teens. This is their worst nightmare, to be quite frank, to be stuck at home all the time with their parents. If you adults were having a hard time with your teens before, there are very few circumstances that have improved because of this. So it's genuinely a challenging time for all parties. But like I just said, one of the things that can really help is doing just that, is putting yourselves in your teen's shoes, recognizing really what they've lost. If you're thinking about this time of year for them, they live all year long for summer, right? They work their tails off, hopefully, to be able to kind of let loose and hang out and maybe make money and have that sense of independence. And that's just been kind of stripped away from them right now. Thinking about our seniors in high school, they lost their experiences of prom, graduation, athletes who had been training all year for maybe these big games and chances to perform. That's all been taken away from them. So really having empathy for your kids, which is a hard thing to do when all you're getting is attitude and yelling and fights, like you said, Danny. And so, first of all, it's grace. Like we've heard many times so far from both Dave and Dawn, it's grace for yourself in the middle of that, but then also grace for your kids, knowing that this is something they have no idea how to navigate as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually, if we could pull up that
Yeah.
is communication with your teen. So
Yeah.
it's an easy acronym to remember, because what we really want when we are communicating with our teens is to listen to them. And so LISTEN, we want to listen to them. So that first piece of it is, carefully listening, really listening, genuinely, and having an understanding element in that. We're not interrupting. Maybe they're saying something that you disagree with, that you would do it a little bit different. I mean, you've got to rein that in as much as you can, because teens above anybody else can tell when you're only listening to get a point across, when you are listening to be able to interject. And so if you can listen genuinely with compassion, with just that piece of just wanting to understand where they're coming from, what they're going through.
Boy, that was a gut check as a parent.
Yeah.
Listening only until you can interject or deliver your point. And it's not listening at all, right?
Right. It's not. It's, it's saying, I hear what you're saying, but, and we want to avoid that as all costs, because most of the time our kids know that that's coming. And so like you said, it's a gut check for real. The I in listen stands for interest. Again, it's having a genuine interest in what they're saying, knowing that what they're talking about is what they're feeling, is what they're going through. And so we want to express an interest to them. Teens, much less so than little kids. I mean, we've got little kids who, run up, they want to share with you, they want to show you. Our teens don't do that as much anymore. So when you get the opportunity to have that conversation with them, have genuine interest. They're going to be able to see that, receive that, and then that's good. That will be what encourages them to have more conversations with you.
That could be as simple as like actually talking to your kid about Fortnite or something that you would never do before, right? It doesn't seem like it's in your wheelhouse. Like, oh, I just let my son or daughter go do their own thing. Yeah. But you're right. It's actually being interested in what they're interested in. Maybe, because what I think we also miss as parents is now such a great time just to get to know your kids better. Right.
Yeah, we have the time. We no longer have the excuse to say we just don't have time for that. We have nothing but time, unfortunately, and that can be hard too. And so absolutely. And along with that interest piece is that everybody knows their kids probably better than any other parents do. So you're going to know if your kid is going to respond to you sitting down and saying, let's talk. The reality is most teens do not respond well to that. They don't, Mom, leave me alone, I'm busy, right? Like that's not how they're going to want to communicate with you. So if you've got an active kid, you take them on a hike, you go outside, you shoot some hoops with them. That is a way to start a conversation on that level playing field of having that common ground, some commonality there. That's definitely a part of that interest piece. The S in listen is signals. And so these are nonverbal communication. Most communication is nonverbal. If I'm standing in the doorway with, an angry face, my kid knows I'm not there to listen joyfully, listen with genuine interest, right? They know I have ulterior motives. So be careful of your body language, how you are expressing yourself. If you're looking at your phone, they know you're not engaged. They know you don't care. So that those nonverbal signals that we give across really matter.
Or even I find this in my kids, he's 8 years old and he's calling me out when I tell him to put his phone down and then what's in my hand for the next 20 minutes. Yeah. So even your kids will call you out on that as well. They'll see that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the reality is that kids learn the most by our example in the model that we set. And so oftentimes, like you said, it's that gut check of, are they doing something that they've seen me do? Are they doing something the way they're talking? It's like a mirror reflected back at you.
Totally.
And that can be hard sometimes.
Yes.
I'll finish with that really quick. So the T in listen stands for thought. So you're really wanting to give thought to what your teen is saying, recognizing that everything that they're saying is probably not the whole message, right? They've got a lot of stuff going on under the surface. Teens, for the most part, are not the best communicators. They're not going to just spill everything out on the table for you. So you've got to do some, reading of your own, reading between the lines, reading those emotions that are underneath what they're really expressing. Emotions is that next piece. It's E, knowing that they have a lot of emotions. Teens, even without a pandemic, even without school drama going on, there is just a lot chemically happening with them. Totally. And it is hard. So you add all of this in on top of that. It's like all the components you need for a bomb to explode.
Right.
And so you got to recognize that as well. It's not just their behaviors that are frustrating you. It's recognizing that there's a lot of stuff under the surface that's leading to these things. And then lastly, that N stands for needs. And so we need to know that it's just like any relationship. There has to be communication in order for a marriage to work. In order for even jobs, people to work together well, there's got to be good communication. And so teens need that communication. They're not going to come up to you and say, Mom, it's been a long time. I really need a good talk with you. Like, that's just not going to happen. But you need to know that that is, an important part of that relationship that you have with them. They need you to be interested. They need you to engage and ask them, because they're not going to just volunteer that stuff.
And I think it's important to say that a lot of this stuff needs practice, right? Just because we put this up on screen and we said, hey, here it is, here's the blueprint, this is all you need to do, that doesn't mean that listening is going to come natural to you. That doesn't mean that you're going to understand signals. So as much as you're giving your kids grace, it becomes just as important to really give yourself grace in this, that these are things you practice. These are things you become better at. Wouldn't you say that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, even preparing for this today, I'm sitting here like, gosh, I need to do this better. So yeah, definitely. I mean, you're not exempt from this stuff. I've got 3 kids, and I continually need to remind myself of all of this stuff. And I think the important point to make is that just because you haven't had a relationship like this with your teen, it doesn't mean that you can't still have one. It doesn't mean that it's too far gone, that your teen doesn't have any interest in you. Like, there is no time like right now to start having that communication with them and trying. And you're going to fail, and they're not going to respond well, and it's going to take practice.
Yeah. And it's really also understanding that what we feel like we're going through, like I could lose my job, or we're worrying about finances and how important that is to us. Just like you said, these little things like summer or prom, on a kid's scale, that is right up there with, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my house.
It's everything.
From a stress level standpoint. Yeah, it's everything to them. And I think it's understanding, as you as a parent, you're thinking, I've got all this stuff to worry about. And that, but to them, from an emotional level, it's the same scar. It really is. Yeah, I really like that. Thanks for sharing that resource.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, there's this whole thing going on about socially distancing, right? So our teens and young adults are supposed to be socially distancing. For a while there, they weren't seeing anyone. So how do we really support their changing needs when it comes to this social distancing stuff?
Yeah, and that is a really hard one, because everybody's going to have, different opinions. Your family may be different in terms of what you really see as safe or appropriate right now. And your teen's family, their friends' families are all going to have different views too. So it's a challenge. And the reality is, just like we were created for community and interaction, teens so much more so. Like we were just talking about, their friends, I mean, you all know this, that is everything to them, their friend group.
Everything.
So not being able to engage, not being able to just hang out, just doing the normal stuff, it's like every part of their identity has slowly been stripped away these last couple of months. And so you have to handle that delicately, and you've got to really care about it. It can be easy, I think, for parents just to say, we don't get to see our friends either, right? Like, it's so easy to just, it is what it is, without really recognizing that we need to go that extra effort to make sure that they are having social interaction. So, I'm sure most teens the teens I see, I know definitely are FaceTiming their friends. They are living on FaceTime with them, which is a good thing. It's not the same. It's not the same as in-person interaction. And all of that screen time, if they were on their phones a ton before this, right now it's 24/7. And that is so hard on you physically, emotionally, mentally.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a conversation you need to have with your family is, where can we make some exceptions? Where can we create a safe environment for our kids to see their friends? That might mean opening up your backyard and setting up lawn chairs 6 feet apart, if that's what it takes, and letting them come over. Yeah, obviously, if that's okay with their families, their friends' families. So it's hard. It's a challenge, and it's going to take that extra effort, but it's recognizing that they need that And it also is going to be a reality check for you parents of, okay, where can we kind of be a little bit more lenient right now? We've had these strict rules that have changed so much from all these policies, but where can we bend a little and give a little so that we're okay with them driving to a parking lot and each kid hanging out in the trunk of their car just so they can talk? You're around them all the time. You see them. Odds are not many kids are really being able to get away with a lot right now without parents noticing.
Right.
But, so just where can we bend? Where can we give? And it takes some creativity. I had some girlfriends over a couple of nights ago and we hung out in my garage, and it was felt so lame, but that's what we did. But at the same time, it was awesome because it's the first time I've really hung out with friends in so long. And that's what these teens need.
Yeah, they do. And just like we said earlier, you see even adults posting pictures of, oh my gosh, I'm finally eating out in a restaurant. That's just the state of the time that we're in. And when it comes to, screen time, so that's been the biggest hot topic that I've really seen right now is screen time. Should I be limiting my kids? And again, I think that's one of those things where that's one of those things you just got to let go for yourself for a while, right? Especially if this is their communication, if this is their social life, you might have to bend a little on that, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to bend a little. At the same time, if you can create avenues for them to be able to do things instead of be on that screen time, do it. You know what they're interested in. If they are artsy, you put a giant piece of cardboard up somewhere and let them make the garage messy and paint. If can they ride their bikes around, skateboard around with friends, get outside, be active? Is that okay with you for them to go on a hike and invite a couple friends? They're outside, limited contact, something like that. And that's going to take kind of cooperating with your teens and figuring out what interests them, because there's really not a lot that really interests them that they're allowed to do, and getting creative in ways for them to kind of pull away, because that's the ideal. Pulling away from that constant screen time is ideal, but realistically, it's just kind of life right now.
It's just kind of life.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to head to one of our last points. So we're recognizing that there's some signs and symptoms. We're recognizing that either anxiety or depression is really starting to rear its head in our teens or our young adults. What are the signs and symptoms of there might need to be some clinical intervention for anxiety or depression with teens or young adults?
And this is such a hard question. And this was a hard question before this pandemic hit. Because again, teens are naturally withdrawn. Teens are naturally wanting to flex their independence. They want to shut that door and never come out of their room. They want their privacy. And so it can be really hard to gauge, okay, where is that line for them where you start to get a little worried? And really, as the parent, it's you engaging with them. It's you communicating, asking, talking, giving them an opportunity to answer your questions. But at the same time, you've got to be ready for the answers, because sometimes the answers are not what you want to hear. The answers can make you feel like you've failed as a parent, like you're doing something wrong. And so it's a fine line to walk. But especially right now, it's making sure that your teens aren't, loss of appetite in the same way, overeating. So you're looking for patterns outside the norm, which is hard because this whole experience is outside the norm. Completely withdrawn. They just do not ever want to be around you, family, siblings. It's so hard with parents because you want to raise up these kids and give them independence to send them out. But right now, everything that they have been practicing with that independence is stripped away, and they're kind of like a child again in your home. They've got no control. So, a good activity to do, and again, this is if they will let you or if they'll be involved in that, is really helping them to see areas that they are still in control of. They weren't in control of schools being shut down. They're not in control of the things that they kind of lost as a result of the pandemic, but they are still in control of their schedules. They're in control of their time, the way they spend their time. they're in control of, friends they get to interact with. And it's really helping them to navigate those things in an intentional way to where they still see, okay, this isn't the complete end of the world. It may feel like it, but how can they still be healthy in the middle of all of this? And that's really, and that can be hard as a parent to get them to cooperate with you with that. And so that's, to be honest, that's a lot of the reason that I see teens is that they are unwilling to talk to their parents. And so it may take, professionals. And if you have a question, if they really are clinically depressed or really struggling with anxiety that's affecting their day-to-day life and crippling them, that's our job, is to kind of see where they are on that spectrum, and to go from there.
Yeah. And that's a good point. That is your job to decide where they're at in that. But I would say as a parent, and for any parents that are listening, most of the time your gut's right. Yeah. If you're feeling that your child is just not the same, most of the time, trust your gut. They're your kids, and if you're feeling that your teen or your young adult is to an unhealthy level, this may be a time where you do need to reach out and get some support, because you don't have access to the answers that these amazing clinicians at Authentic Connections Counseling do, because this is what they do. They deal with this full time. Your crazy teen that you think that's what Jill does best, creating space for them to communicate, and they may share things with her that they can't say with you, and that's why we really are here to offer that value today. And I just want to kind of close out by saying, 20% off to anybody that wants to really go in. They get 20% off their first 3 visits using the code Plum Creek. This is the time to reach out for help. We know that phone sometimes is 10,000 pounds to pick up and reach out to somebody and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. But the reason we're doing this is you got to know 3 amazing clinicians today. This is just them talking. This is how they work. So you can have a choice to talk to these guys either live or in the replay if you comment, or visiting the Facebook page or the website and really starting the conversation. So any closing thoughts, Jill?
I would just say to really be purposeful and encourage your teens, your kids, even yourselves, to be able to find ways to still have value and have purpose right now. That's the biggest thing, especially for teens. So if they can be a mentor to somebody right now, if they can bake cookies for friends, for neighbors, if they can see what chores, ways that they can still be helpful, those are the things that's going to give them, since they've lost all the other areas of purpose in their life, to say, okay, I can still be of value and I still have purpose and involvement.
Love that. Well, thanks for your time today. Thanks for everybody that joined us either live or in the replay. We hope this was valuable. What's one way you can help? That's to share this content. Somebody might need to see this today that is struggling and needs this type of information and support. So I want to thank our 3 clinicians today that we had on live, which is Dawn, Dave, and Jill, to add this value to us today. So thanks again, Jill, for being with us today. And thank you, everybody, for stopping by, and follow Authentic Connections Counseling Center for more live content coming up in the future. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you.